My son, my only child, stood in the middle of my living room, his face a mask of pure rage. He pointed a finger at me, his hand trembling, and screamed for dozens of pairs of eyes to hear. "What are you doing here? This is my wife's house now." The words sliced through the chatter of the party, hanging in the air like poison. "My name is Genevieve Dubois. I'm 62 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about family. Before that horrible afternoon, my life was quiet, orderly. I live in a house my late husband, Robert, designed for us just outside of Boston. A house filled with art, with memories, with the scent of old books and lemon polish. After Robert passed, my son Leo and his wife Brenda were my entire world. They were my rock, the ones who held my hand through the worst of the grief. For an entire year, they were perfect, or so I thought. Little did I know, their comfort was a carefully constructed cage, and I was the bird they were waiting to pluck clean. They thought I was a fragile old woman, lost in my memories, uneasy target. They saw my kindness as weakness, my trust as an open door. They were wrong. I'm going to tell you the whole story. How I went from being a grieving mother to a woman fighting for her very existence. I'll show you the breadcrumbs of deceit they left, the chilling moments I realized I was being played, and the beautiful, cold precision of their downfall. They thought they were taking my house, my money, my sanity, but they forgot one thing. I am my husband's legacy, and I am untouchable. This journey isn't easy to revisit. The memories are sharp, like broken glass. So, if you're willing to listen, I'd be grateful for the company. Stick around to hear the whole truth. You won't want to miss a single detail. It all started on a Tuesday. I remember the light that morning, the way it streamed through the east-facing windows of the sunroom, making the dust motes dance like tiny diamonds. That was Robert's favorite room. I was sitting in his worn leather armchair, a cup of Earl Grey steaming in my hands, listening to a Debussy piece on the radio. The house was quiet, filled with the comfortable silence that follows a long and happy life lived within its walls. I felt settled, at peace. I had no idea that peace was about to be systematically dismantled, brick by painful brick. Around 10 o'clock, Leo and Brenda's car crunched up the gravel driveway. It was unusual for them to visit on a weekday without calling first. A tiny, fleeting knot of unease tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it away. They were my family. Their presence was a gift. When I opened the door, they weren't smiling. They had on their serious faces the ones they'd worn at the funeral home, at the reading of the will. Brenda was holding a thick manila envelope, clutching it to her chest like a shield. Leo's voice, when he spoke, was a low, velvety murmur designed to sound like pure concern. He told me, "Mom, can we talk? We're worried about you." They sat on the sofa opposite me, the one Robert and I had picked out decades ago. They were a united front, leaning forward, their expressions identical masks of practiced sympathy. Leo did most of the talking. He said he'd noticed I'd been struggling. He brought up small things, little moments twisted into weapons against my own mind. He mentioned me forgetting the name of a distant cousin at a family gathering, a cousin I've seen twice in 20 years. He talked about me misplacing my reading glasses, something I've done every day for the last 30 years. Then Brenda chimed in, her voice soft and saccharine. She reminded me of how I'd supposedly forgotten about a lunch date they'd planned the week before. "We called and called Jen," she'd said, using the nickname only Robert used to use. "We were so worried something had happened." That was the first crack, a tiny, hairline fracture in their story. I remembered that day perfectly. They had canceled the lunch. Brenda had sent me a text message an hour beforehand saying she had a migraine. I had the message saved on my phone. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Why would they lie about something so small, so easily verifiable? I didn't react. I kept my face placid, a calm lake on the surface, while underneath, a storm was brewing. I just nodded and murmured something about being so scattered lately. That was the opening Leo was waiting for. He pushed the manila envelope across the coffee table. The sound it made sliding across the polished wood was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "We think it's time. We've had a lawyer draw up power of attorney papers. It's just a formality, a safety net. It would allow me to handle your finances, pay the bills, make sure everything is taken care of so you don't have to worry about a thing." I looked at the documents. The pages were crisp, white, and cold. The legalese seemed to swim before my eyes. They wanted me to sign away control of my life, the life Robert and I had built, the legacy he had entrusted to me. They weren't suggesting this to protect me. They were suggesting it to control me. The lie about the lunch date wasn't a mistake. It was a test. They were testing the waters, seeing how much I would accept, how easily I would bend to their version of reality. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I picked up the papers, feeling their weight. I told them I needed to think about it, that it was a big decision. I even managed a weak, appreciative smile. "Thank you for being so concerned about me," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The relief that washed over their faces was instant and unguarded. It was too quick, too triumphant. They thought they had won. They left soon after, telling me to take my time, but not too much time. The moment their car was out of sight, I walked back to my chair, my hands trembling slightly. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through my messages from the previous week, and there it was, in black and white. Brenda's text: "So sorry, Jen. Terrible migraine. Have to cancel lunch. Rain check soon. AXO." The screen glowed in the dimming afternoon light. It was such a small thing, a tiny, insignificant lie. But it wasn't small, was it? It was everything. It was the first pulled thread that would unravel their entire tapestry of deception. That was the moment my grief for my husband was eclipsed by a new, cold feeling. It was the moment the trust I had in my own son didn't just crack. It shattered. After Leo and Brenda left that day, the house no longer felt like a sanctuary. The silence I once cherished now seemed to have sharp edges. Every shadow in the hallway looked longer. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep that wasn't my own. They had planted a seed of doubt, not just about my mind, but about the very safety of my home. But the confirmation of their lie about the canceled lunch did something else. It cleared the fog. I wasn't going crazy. I was being managed. My first move was small, almost instinctual. For the past year, Leo had made a habit of stopping by in the mornings to help me with my mail. He'd sorted at the kitchen island, separating junk from bills, telling me he was saving me the headache. At the time, I saw it as the gesture of a loving son. Now, I saw it for what it was, an interception. He was controlling the flow of information. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I waited by the window, and the moment I saw the mail truck turn onto our street, I walked down the long gravel driveway myself, the cold morning air biting at my cheeks. I got to the mailbox just as the carrier was putting the letters in. I gave him a polite wave and took the bundle directly from his hand. It felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of territory. For 3 days, the search was fruitless. I sat at Robert's old desk, a place I hadn't used in months, and went through everything. I logged into my bank accounts online, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard at first, then growing more confident. Everything seemed normal. The balances were correct. The usual automatic payments for utilities were going out. A small, insidious voice in my head started to whisper, "Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe the text message was a fluke. Maybe you are just a lonely old woman looking for drama." I almost gave in to that voice. I almost put it all away and called Leo to apologize for being suspicious. But then came Friday. Tucked between a seed catalog and an alumni magazine was a thin, official-looking envelope from a bank I didn't recognize, a mortgage lender based downtown. My heart gave a painful lurch. My house was paid off. Robert and I had burned the mortgage papers in a celebratory bonfire in the backyard 15 years ago. I had no business with a mortgage lender. My hands were not quite steady as I tore it open. The paper inside was cold and impersonal. It was a notice. It stated that my application for a home equity line of credit for $250,000 was in its final stages of processing, and they just needed one more signed document to release the funds. $250,000. The number didn't seem real. I read the sentence again, and again. And then I saw the attachment. It was a copy of the initial application page they had on file. My name, my address, my social security number, all correct. And at the bottom, in the space for the applicant's signature, was my name, Genevieve Dubois, except it wasn't my signature. It was a crude, shaky imitation. It looked like the attempt of a child trying to copy a parent's handwriting. The loops were too wide, the slant was all wrong. It was a pathetic, insulting forgery. The floor didn't just disappear from under my feet. The entire world tilted on its axis. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a lie about lunch. This was a grand, calculated theft. They weren't just trying to control my finances. They were trying to liquidate my life, starting with the very walls that held all my memories. I stumbled back and sank into a chair, the letter trembling in my hand. They thought I was so far gone, so senile and out of touch, that I wouldn't even notice $250,000 being stolen from under me. They saw my home not as a legacy of love, but as a cash machine. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the realization that followed, a truth so ugly it felt like swallowing glass. The image I had carried of my son for 40 years, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, the teenager whose first heartbreak I'd soothed, the man I'd proudly watched build a life, it all dissolved into smoke. In its place stood a stranger, a predator who looked at his grieving mother and saw nothing but an obstacle between him and a pile of cash. My love for him had been a resource to be exploited, and my trust a tool for his own enrichment. That same night, I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Robert's estate lawyer, Mr. Finch. My hand was steady. The fear and shock from my discovery had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. Mr. Finch had known Robert since they were college roommates, and his loyalty was a thing of legend, as solid and unbreachable as the mahogany desk in his downtown office. I didn't tell him everything over the phone. The words felt too dangerous to speak into a simple receiver. I just told him I had a matter of some urgency regarding Robert's estate and my own affairs. His voice on the other end was calm and reassuring. He told me to come to his office the next morning and to bring any relevant documents. Walking into his firm felt like stepping into another era. The air smelled of old leather and paper, a scent of stability that was the complete opposite of the chaos churning inside me. Mr. Finch greeted me not with a handshake, but with a concerned look and a gentle hand on my shoulder, guiding me to a chair. He was a man of few words, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid the forged loan application on his desk. I watched him put on his reading glasses and lean forward under the green glass lamp. The silence stretched on as he examined the document, his expression hardening from concern into a quiet, controlled anger. He looked at the signature, then up at me, and back down again. He didn't need to say a word. I knew he believed me. He told me he would look into it immediately and discreetly. He had access to private investigators and forensic accountants, people who moved through the world of finance like ghosts, uncovering truths buried deep in spreadsheets and public records. I left his office feeling like I had finally passed a heavy burden to someone strong enough to help me carry it. 2 days later, he called me back. The information he had uncovered was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The $250,000 loan wasn't the plan. It was just the first frantic grab for cash. The real plan was a complete and total annihilation of my life. Mr. Finch explained it to me in his calm, measured tones, which made the horrifying details even more chilling. Leo and Brenda were drowning. They had poured every cent they had, and hundreds of thousands more that they'd borrowed, into a tech startup that was an abject failure. They were facing total financial ruin. My estate, which Robert had so carefully built the house, the stock portfolio, the art collection, totaling well over $1.2 million, was their only way out. The power of attorney was the key. Their goal was to get my signature on those papers and then, with the help of the forgetfulness narrative they had been building for months, have me declared mentally incompetent. Once that was done, they would have the legal authority to do anything they wanted. They would sell the house, liquidate the stocks, auction off the art. They would pay off their debts and use the rest to start over, leaving me in some state-run nursing home to live out my days, a footnote in my own life story. But that still wasn't the depth of the pit. The sickest part, Mr. Finch revealed, was the groundwork they had laid. His investigator had spoken to a few of my neighbors, some of our mutual friends. Leo and Brenda had been telling people for months that they were so worried about Mom. They had told our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, that I was convinced people were stealing from me. They had told a close friend of mine from the museum that I'd had a frightening episode where I didn't recognize Leo for a full minute. They weren't just planning to steal from me. They were methodically and cruelly erasing me, painting a portrait of a senile, paranoid old woman so that when the time came, no one would question their takeover. Every concerned call, every helping hand, every loving gesture from the past year had been a lie. It was all a performance, a rehearsal for the final act of my destruction. Sitting there, listening to the full, monstrous scope of their betrayal, I felt the last of my grief for the sun I thought I had evaporate. It was replaced by something cold and hard, like steel forging in a fire. They thought my love was a weakness they could exploit. They thought my trust was a door they could walk right through. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about the woman Robert Dubois had married. They had pushed me to the edge of a cliff, expecting me to fall. They had no idea I was about to learn how to fly. Knowing the full, monstrous truth about my son's plan changed the very air I breathed. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a stage, and I, its sole resident, had been cast in a role I never auditioned for, the feeble, fading matriarch. Mr. Finch had advised me to do nothing, to let him handle the legalities, but I knew that wasn't enough. To truly defeat them, I had to understand them. I had to let them think they were winning. So, I put on my mask. The next time they came over, for a usual Sunday dinner, the performance began. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, to look at my son, the child I had raised, and see a vulture circling, to accept a hug from my daughter-in-law, Brenda, knowing her arms were the bars of a cage she was building for me. Her perfume, a cloying gardenia scent, seemed to stick to me, a constant, sickly reminder of her presence in my space. I played my part. I feigned confusion over the TV remote. I asked Leo the same question about his work twice in the span of 10 minutes. Watching him exchange that patented, condescendingly patient look with Brenda, they would pat my hand and tell me not to worry, their voices dripping with false sympathy. I let Brenda help me in the kitchen, watching her move around the space with an unsettling air of ownership, her eyes already measuring the walls for new paint. They were so confident, so wrapped up in their own brilliance, that they started getting sloppy. They believed their own narrative about me completely. They saw what they wanted to see. A dotty old woman who was slipping away, leaving a convenient vacuum for them to fill. And in their arrogance, they made a mistake. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. I had pretended to doze off in my armchair, a tactic I was finding increasingly useful. It allowed me to listen, to observe them when their guards were down. Brenda's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and a wide, predatory smile spread across her face. She got up and walked into the adjoining study to take the call, pulling the door almost completely shut, but not quite. She thought I was asleep. Leo was absorbed in his own phone. Her voice was a low, excited whisper, but the old house was quiet, and sound traveled. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. I heard her mention our address. I heard her use the words escrow and closing date. I heard her laugh and tell the person on the phone that the current occupant would be relocated to a more suitable facility very soon, so there would be no delays. My blood ran cold. She was talking to a realtor. She was already in the process of selling my house, my home, the place Robert had built with his own 2 hands. But that wasn't the slip-up. That was just confirmation of their vile plan. The real mistake came a moment later. Her voice rose with excitement, and I heard a string of words so clearly it was as if she'd shouted them in my ear. She told the person on the phone that they couldn't possibly miss the big party they were planning in a few weeks. She called it their official housewarming and company launch party, all in one. She said it would be the perfect way to announce their new beginning to all their friends and potential investors. A party in my house. A party to celebrate my removal and the theft of my legacy. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it almost made me gasp out loud. They weren't just going to quietly dispose of me, they were going to throw a lavish celebration on the ashes of my life, inviting everyone they knew to witness their triumph. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing even. I let the silence settle after she hung up. Inside my mind, however, 1,000 gears were turning, clicking into place with cold, hard precision. They had just revealed the final act of their play. They had told me the time, the place, and the method of my public execution. Brenda came back into the room, humming a little tune, her face glowing with victory. She looked at me, supposedly sleeping in the chair, and I felt her gaze on me like a physical touch, a dismissive, triumphant pat on the head of a pet who had outlived its usefulness. She thought she was planning her coronation. She had no idea she was actually sending out engraved invitations to her own downfall. They had just handed me the stage, the audience, and the perfect moment to drop the curtain on their entire pathetic, greedy charade. And I was going to make sure it was a finale no one would ever forget. Knowing the date of the party gave me a deadline. It was a ticking clock, counting down to the moment they planned to publicly declare my life over. My conversations with Mr. Finch were tactical now, focused on legal maneuvers and evidence. But something was still missing for me. A piece of the puzzle. I understood what they were doing, but I couldn't grasp the why. Not really. Simple greed felt too shallow an explanation for the sheer, personal cruelty of their methods. To plot against your own mother, to gaslight her and parade her supposed decline in front of friends, that came from a place deeper and darker than an empty bank account. I needed to understand the root of this poison, and to do that I found myself drawn to the one place I still felt Robert's presence most strongly, his study. It was a room I had mostly kept closed, a perfect time capsule of the man I loved. The faint, sweet scent of his pipe tobacco still clung to the velvet curtains. His reading glasses were still on top of a book by the window. I went in there not as an investigator, but as a wife seeking solace, hoping to find some of his strength in the silence. I ran my fingers over the spines of his books on architecture and art history. I sat in his chair, and then my eyes landed on the bottom drawer of his large oak desk, a drawer he always kept locked. Robert had given me a key to it years ago, telling me it was for in case of emergency. I suppose this qualified. My hand trembled as I turned the small, ornate key in the lock. The drawer slid open with a soft sigh. It wasn't filled with legal documents or stock certificates. It was filled with a single, thick file folder. On the tab, in my husband's neat, strong handwriting, was one word: Leo. My heart sank. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. This felt like a violation of two trusts, my husband's privacy and my son's. But I had to know. I lifted the folder out. It was heavy. It contained years of my son's life, documented by a worried father. There were report cards showing mediocre grades next to comments about his lack of focus. There were copies of checks Robert had written to cover Leo's debts, starting with a credit card in college and escalating over the years. But the real story was in the letters. Copies of letters Robert had sent to Leo, and a few of Leo's angry, defensive replies. Robert had seen the flaw in our son's character long before I had. He saw a desperate need for the rewards of success without the patience for the hard work it required. He had written to Leo, pleading with him to find a path of his own, to build something real, instead of always chasing shortcuts. Then I found the business plan. It was for Leo's tech startup. I read through the jargon-filled pages, and a slow, sickening realization dawned on me. The company wasn't just some random tech idea. It was an AI platform designed to generate architectural blueprints and interior designs in seconds. It promised to create what it called art without the artist. It was a direct, almost pathological repudiation of everything Robert's life had stood for. Robert was a master of his craft. He believed in the human touch, in the soul of a design, in legacy and permanence. Leo's company was designed to make all of that obsolete, to replace the thoughtful, painstaking work of a human creator with the instant, soulless output of an algorithm. This was never just about the money. This was about a deep, festering resentment. Leo hadn't just been living in his father's shadow, he'd been rotting in it. He didn't want to build his own legacy. He wanted to obliterate Robert's. He wanted to prove that his father's life's work was worthless, that it could be replicated and made cheap by a machine. In the house, our house, Robert's masterpiece, the ultimate symbol of his success and talent. Taking that from me wasn't just a financial transaction. It was the final, symbolic victory. By seizing the father's greatest creation, he could fund the very company designed to erase his father's philosophy from the world. The papers lay scattered on the desk. The truth was colder and uglier than I could have fathomed. My son's betrayal was born from a bitter, lifelong war with a ghost. In his twisted view, I wasn't his mother. I was just the curator of the museum. He was determined to burn to the ground. Well, the fire was coming. But it was his world, not Robert's, that was about to be reduced to ashes. With the revelation about Leo's deep-seated jealousy, the entire conflict snapped into sharp focus. This was not a simple smash and grab. This was a siege. Leo wasn't just trying to rob a bank. He was trying to tear down a kingdom to spite the memory of its king. And that knowledge gave me a new kind of strength. I was no longer just a victim defending her assets. I was the guardian of a legacy, and I would not let it fall. I went back to Mr. Finch's office the next day, not with fear, but with fire in my eyes. I told him what I had discovered in Robert's private file. I explained the business plan for Leo's company, the letters, the long history of resentment. I needed him to see that we weren't dealing with a rational actor motivated by simple greed. We were dealing with a son, consumed by a lifelong obsession to eclipse his father. Mr. Finch listened patiently, his fingertips steepled under his chin. When I was finished, there was a long silence. He looked at me with a profound sadness, but also with a glimmer of something else, respect. He told me that this new information painted a much darker picture, but it also reinforced a belief he'd long held about my husband. He told me that Robert wasn't just a brilliant architect. He was one of the most cautious and strategic men he had ever known. This sparked a thought. I looked at Mr. Finch and asked him a question that had been hovering at the edge of my mind. I told him how Robert always had a contingency plan for everything, from a leaky roof to a stock market dip. It seemed impossible that he wouldn't have a contingency plan for the one thing he was truly worried about: Leo's character. I asked him if there was anything at all in the original estate plan that was designed as a final, unbreakable defense. That was the magic question. It was like I had given him a key to a door he had forgotten was there. A slow, thoughtful expression spread across his face. He stood up and walked over to a massive filing cabinet, one of the old, steel ones that seemed to hold the secrets of generations. He pulled out a thick, dust-covered binder labeled Dubois, Robert and Genevieve Estate. He laid it on the desk and began to leaf through the decades-old pages. My heart pounded in my chest. He stopped on a section with a blue tab. He read silently for a full minute, and then he looked up at me over the rim of his glasses. For the first time that week, he smiled. He explained it to me in the calmest, clearest voice I had ever heard. Years ago, when Leo's financial irresponsibility had become a clear pattern, Robert had done something extraordinary. Worried that Leo might one day try to manipulate me or pressure me into making poor decisions after he was gone, he had taken the most significant assets of the house, the entire stock portfolio, and two of the most valuable paintings, and placed them into a specifically designed, ironclad, irrevocable trust. The name itself sounded powerful. Irrevocable. Mr. Finch explained that, in the eyes of the law, I didn't technically own the house anymore. The trust did. I was named as the sole lifetime trustee and beneficiary, which meant I had absolute control and use of everything in it until the day I died. But the assets themselves were in a legal fortress. They could not be borrowed against, they could not be used as collateral. They could not be sold by anyone other than me. The trustee, a power of attorney, even a legitimate one, would be as useless as a feather trying to knock down a brick wall. The trust was a separate entity, and it answered to no one but me. The fraudulent loan application Leo had submitted wasn't just immoral. It was legally impossible. The house had no equity to be borrowed against because it wasn't mine to mortgage. It belonged to the trust. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost took my breath away washed over me. It was a message in a bottle, sent from my husband across the sea of time. He had seen this coming. He had known, in that secret, worried part of his heart, that I would need protecting, and he had built me this final, invisible fortress. The tears that came to my eyes weren't tears of sadness or fear, they were tears of overwhelming love and gratitude. He was still here. He was still taking care of me. I left Mr. Finch's office with a certified copy of the trust documents in my purse. They felt heavier than paper. They felt like a stone tablet of commandments from Robert himself. My son and his wife thought they were playing a game of chess against a defenseless pawn. They were about to find out they were playing against a queen with a ghost for a king, and they had been checkmated from the very first move. They just didn't know it yet. The weight of the trust document in my purse changed everything. It was no longer a question of if I could win, but how I would choose to do so. The fear was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a hot, chaotic fire. It had cooled and hardened into something sharp, precise, and purposeful. I finally had the unbreakable shield Robert had left me. Now, I needed to sharpen my sword. I knew a quiet legal victory wasn't enough. Mr. Finch could send a letter. The loan application would be cancelled. And Leo and Brenda would slink away, defeated but not destroyed. They would simply craft a new narrative, telling everyone I'd shadasad an episode of paranoia, that the lawyers had gotten everything wrong. They would continue to paint me as the villain, the confused mother who had turned on her loving children. No. Their crime was public. Their lies had been whispered in the ears of my friends and neighbors. Their punishment had to be public, too. The party. Brenda's housewarming. The moment I'd overheard her planning it, I'd felt a surge of cold fury. Now, I saw it for what it was, a gift. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they were assembling the perfect audience for their own humiliation. They were gathering every person they wanted to impress, every person they had lied to, all under my roof. They were building their own stage. It would be a crime not to give them the performance of a lifetime. I presented my plan to Mr. Finch. He sat, as always, behind his imposing desk, a bastion of legal propriety. I told him I didn't want to stop the party. I wanted it to happen. I wanted Leo and Brenda to stand in the middle of my living room, basking in their stolen glory. I wanted them to feel the absolute peak of their triumph. And then I wanted to walk in and shatter it all into a million pieces. To his credit, he was hesitant at first. He was a man of the law, accustomed to quiet negotiations and sealed documents, not dramatic confrontations. He warned me it could be unpredictable, messy, but I held my ground. I explained that this wasn't just about fraud, it was about the public assassination of my character. The only way to counter their narrative was with an undeniable public display of the truth. I needed to reclaim my story in front of the very people they had tried to fool. He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. He understood it was not just about the law anymore, it was about justice. The next 2 weeks were a blur of calculated preparation. Brenda was busy sending out elegant digital invitations, and, I later learned, consulting with a caterer. I was busy orchestrating a downfall. Mr. Finch made a formal report of the attempted fraud to the Financial Crimes Unit of the Boston Police Department. He wasn't demanding an immediate arrest, but creating a formal record and arranging for a police presence. He explained the situation to a Detective Murphy, who agreed to dispatch to plainclothes officers to the party. They were not to intervene unless I was threatened, but simply to be official witnesses. Their very presence would be a clear, unspoken statement. Mr. Finch also prepared what he called the revelation packet. A slim, elegant portfolio containing a certified copy of the irrevocable trust, a notarized affidavit from me detailing the gaslighting and manipulation, and a copy of the fraudulent loan application with the forged signature highlighted. It was a neat, tidy bundle of facts, a bomb of truth waiting to be detonated. As the day of the party approached, Brenda sent me a text, a masterpiece of condescending sweetness. She told me they were having a few friends over and that they hoped it wouldn't disturb me. She mentioned she had already packed a small overnight bag for me with my essentials, as they had arranged for me to spend a relaxing night at a lovely respite home nearby, just so the noise wouldn't be too much for me. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just throwing me out. They were trying to trick me into leaving willingly. I texted back a simple, "That's very thoughtful of you, dear." The stage was set. The actors were in place. They had planned a celebration of their new beginning. I had planned an ending. As the sun set on the evening of the party, I stood by my bedroom window, watching the expensive cars begin to line my street. I felt no fear, no anxiety, only a profound, steady calm. It was the calm of a playwright who knows every line, every cue, and exactly how the final act is going to end. The guests were arriving, the champagne was being poured, and the true owner of the house was about to make her entrance. Mr. Finch and I didn't go straight to the house. We sat in his discreet, dark sedan parked 2 blocks away, under the canopy of an old maple tree. The 2 plainclothes officers were in another car just behind us. From our vantage point, we could see the glow of my home, every window blazing with light, spilling a warm, inviting yellow onto the manicured lawns. It looked like a beacon of happiness, a picture from a magazine. But I knew it was a lie. It was a beautiful facade built on a foundation of rot. The sounds of the party drifted on the cool night air, the rhythmic thumping of a bass line I didn't recognize, the high-pitched peals of laughter, the murmur of 100 conversations all blending into a meaningless roar. Sounds that should have represented life and joy in my home now sounded like a desecration. Each burst of laughter felt like a personal insult. I watched the guests arrive. I saw Mrs. Gable from next door, the one Leo had told I was becoming paranoid. I saw old friends from the museum, people I'd known for 30 years, the ones Brenda had fed lies to about my frightening episodes. They were all there, sipping champagne that had been bought with a stolen future, admiring art that was being appraised for a quick sale. My stomach churned, not with fear, but with a profound, sorrowful anger. In my lap, I held the revelation packet Mr. Finch had prepared. The leather of the portfolio was cool to the touch. Inside lay the truth, condensed into a few sheets of paper: Robert's foresight, my son's treachery, and the unbreakable power of the trust. This packet was my shield and my sword. For a moment, a wave of grief washed over me. I thought of Leo as a little boy, his small hand in mine, promising to always take care of me when I got old. Where did that little boy go? When did the rot set in? It was a grief for a son who was still alive, but was more lost to me than if he had died. Then, I knew I needed to see them. I needed one last look before I walked in. I told Mr. Finch I would be right back. I got out of the car and walked silently along the sidewalk, keeping to the shadows. I slipped through the old hedge gate into my own backyard, my feet silent on the soft grass. From the darkness of Robert S.E. Woolsey garden, I had a perfect, unobstructed view through the large glass doors of the living room. And that's when I saw it, the first crack in their united front. The room was crowded. Brenda was in her element, flitting from group to group, her laugh loud and performative. She was holding a glass of champagne, playing the role of the grand lady of the manor she so desperately wanted to be. But Leo was not celebrating. He was standing near the fireplace, his shoulders tight, a sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool evening. He was talking to a group of men in expensive suits, clearly his potential investors, but his eyes kept darting around the room, towards the door, like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. Then Brenda glided over to him, a brilliant, fake smile plastered on her face. She looped her arm through his. I saw her speak to him through her teeth, her smile never wavering. Leo's face paled. He shook his head, his response a clipped, frantic whisper. She squeezed his arm, hard, her knuckles white. Her smile became a fraction tighter, her eyes like chips of ice. He was the desperate one, terrified of the whole charade collapsing. She was the one in love with the fantasy, furious at him for showing any sign of weakness that might shatter her perfect illusion. Their alliance wasn't a partnership of equals. It was his raw panic fueling her delusional ambition. They weren't a team. They were a bomb and a lit match. Watching them through the glass, I saw them not as masterminds, but for what they truly were, a terrified boy and a grasping, arrogant woman, already beginning to devour each other. Their foundation was nothing but sand. I turned away from the window and walked back through the darkness, the crunch of gravel under my feet, the only sound in the quiet night. I opened the car door and got back in. Mr. Finch looked at me, his expression a silent question. I gave him a single, firm nod. The waiting was over. It was time to bring down the house. We walked up the stone path to my front door. My door. The familiar weight of the old brass knocker, the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the trellis Robert had built. Every detail was a piece of my soul. And tonight, it was a war zone. Mr. Finch was on my right, a calm, resolute presence. On my left, Detectives Murphy and Chun, looking for all the world like two slightly overdressed party guests. I felt a strange, profound stillness settle over me. The final moves of the game were about to be made. Mr. Finch simply turned the knob. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. They wanted everyone to feel welcome in their new home. We stepped into the foyer. The wave of noise and heat hit me first. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the smell of champagne. My living room, usually a place of quiet contemplation, was crammed with strangers. Their loud chatter bounced off the walls, a chaotic symphony of sound. A waiter I'd never seen before offered me a flute of champagne from a silver tray. I politely declined. For a moment, we just stood there, an island of cold reality in their sea of fantasy. A few people glanced at us, their eyes registering mild confusion before turning back to their conversations. We were invisible. We were not part of their story. Then, the music faded. A hush fell over the room as Brenda, radiant in a shimmering cocktail dress, positioned herself at the bottom of the main staircase. She tapped a fork against her glass, a bright, clear sound that demanded attention. Leo stood beside her, his hand on the small of her back. He looked pale, but he was managing a tense smile. This was their moment. Brenda began to speak, her voice oozing a practiced sincerity. She thanked everyone for coming to celebrate their new chapter. She spoke glowingly of Leo's brilliant new company, which was, she assured the investors in the room, poised to change the world. Then, her tone shifted to one of grave theatrical sadness. She spoke of the difficult past year and the challenges of caring for an aging parent. She told the crowd that it had been a heartbreaking decision, but that she and Leo had finally convinced his dear, confused mother to accept a place in a wonderful long-term care facility, a place where she could be safe and looked after. She said it with a little quiver in her voice, as if she were the one making the ultimate sacrifice. Several people in the crowd nodded sympathetically. Some even looked at her with admiration. She raised her glass high. "So I want to propose a toast," she declared, her voice ringing with triumph, "to new beginnings, to bold futures, and to our new home." As the crowd raised their glasses in unison, I took 3 steps forward, moving out of the shadows of the foyer and into the full light of the living room. I cleared my throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but in that poised, silent moment, it was enough. Heads turned. A collective, sharp intake of breath seemed to suck the very air from the room. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The sea of faces parted as people instinctively stepped back, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. Brenda froze, her glass held aloft, her perfect smile cracking like thin ice. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face, but it was Leo who broke. The moment he saw me, his mask of civility didn't just slip, it vaporized. His face contorted into a mask of pure, childish rage. The fear I'd seen in him earlier had boiled over into fury. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice a raw, ugly shriek that echoed in the dead silence. He screamed at me, asking what I was doing here. He bellowed for everyone to hear that this was his wife's house now. He had just handed me the executioner's sword. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I met his furious gaze with a look of cold, placid calm. A small, sad smile touched my lips. From my purse I slowly, deliberately, pulled out the leather portfolio. I let my voice carry into every corner of the silent room, each word clear and precise. I told him that I was afraid the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts would have to vehemently disagree. Furthermore, I added, so would the explicit, unalterable articles of the Dubois family irrevocable trust, which his father had the foresight to establish more than 10 years ago. While every eye in the room was fixed on me and the document I now held, Mr. Finch executed the final move. He walked calmly over to Detectives Murphy and Chun, who had remained quietly by the door. He opened his own portfolio and handed them the revelation packet. He pointed directly to the fraudulent quarter-mile loan application and the clumsy, forged signature at the bottom. The detectives looked at the document, then at Leo, their expressions shifting from passive observation to professional interest. Brenda's champagne glass slipped from her numb fingers. It hit the polished hardwood floor with a sound like a gunshot, shattering the silence and the last of her illusions. But then a new silence fell, one that was deeper and more absolute than before. It was the sound of a future imploding. It was the sound of two lives being publicly and irrevocably dismantled. Leo and Brenda just stood there, frozen in the wreckage of their own greed, while 100 pairs of eyes bore down on them, no longer as friends or investors, but as horrified witnesses to a spectacular and pathetic public execution. The sound of Brenda's champagne glass shattering was the starting gun for the end of their world. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. It was a perfect tableau of public ruin. Detective Murphy, in a voice that was calm but carried an undeniable authority, took a step forward. He didn't use handcuffs or raise his voice. He simply informed Leo and Brenda that a formal complaint of felony fraud had been filed and that their presence was requested for questioning downtown. He then told them, in no uncertain terms, that they were trespassing on private property and needed to leave immediately. The walk from the center of my living room to the front door must have felt like the longest walk of their lives. Every eye followed them. The people they had lied to, the investors they had tried to swindle, the friends whose sympathy they had weaponized, all of them were now a silent jury, their faces a mixture of disgust and horrified pity. Brenda was sobbing, a hand clamped over her mouth. Leo looked like a ghost, his eyes hollow and vacant, staring at nothing. As they were escorted out into the night, the life they had been trying to steal collapsed in on them. The party dissolved in a wave of awkward, mumbled apologies. People couldn't look me in the eye, ashamed of their own credulity. Within 15 minutes, the house was empty, save for me, Mr. Finch, and the debris of a party that had turned into a funeral. Their downfall was as swift as it was total. Within a month, the full weight of their actions came crashing down. Faced with the ironclad evidence of the trust and the fraudulent loan documents, they were formally charged. Their tech startup, built on a foundation of lies and debt, imploded spectacularly. Their names were ruined. The social circle that Brenda had so desperately courted shunned them completely. They had gambled everything on the belief that I was weak, and they had lost in the most public way imaginable. In the weeks that followed, I walked through the rooms of the house Robert had built for us. It was still beautiful, still filled with memories, but something had been broken. The stain of their betrayal lingered in the air. I realized that my son hadn't just tried to steal the house, he had tried to poison what it represented, and I refused to live with that poison. The final plot twist wasn't something they did, or some new legal battle. It was a quiet, profound realization that bloomed inside of me. For so long, I thought my duty was to protect the house, this physical monument to Robert's legacy. But I was wrong. Robert's true legacy wasn't the wood, the stone, the art on the walls. It was the strength he had shown me, the love he had given me, and the foresight with which he had protected me. The house was a vessel for that legacy. But it wasn't the legacy itself, and I didn't need the vessel anymore. On my own terms, with Mr. Finch handling the details, I put the house on the market. It sold in a week. I bought a beautiful, light-filled condominium in the heart of Boston, overlooking the public garden, and with a significant portion of the proceeds from the sale, I established the Robert Dubois Grant for a Young Artists Scholarship Fund to support emerging painters and sculptors who showed the kind of integrity and passion that had defined my husband's life. My final act of healing was to let go of the last ghost. The guilt. A part of me had been wrestling with the question of where I went wrong, how I could have raised a son who could do such a thing. But as I reviewed the first applications for the grant, reading the stories of these bright, hopeful young people, I understood Leo's choices were his own. My love for him was not my mistake. His betrayal was his alone. My masterpiece was not my son. It was my own survival. And I learned that the greatest work of art isn't something you can hang on a wall or display on a pedestal. It's the strength you find in the rubble, the courage to rebuild your life when the people who were supposed to love you most tried to burn it to the ground. It's the masterpiece you create from the act of defending your own existence. Telling this story has been a part of that rebuilding. It's a final reclaiming of my own narrative. I've told you everything from my new home, Erie in Boston, watching the swans on the lagoon. It makes me realize how far a story can travel, how a single voice can reach out from a quiet room and find a listener. I'd love to know where in the world my voice has landed tonight. If you feel comfortable, I invite you to share what city you're listening from in the comments below. It would be a beautiful and welcome reminder that in our struggles and our strengths, none of us are ever truly alone.